بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي.
Hello students. In this lecture we will talk about three major types of cognitive behavioral therapies that are quite interconnected. I requested the clinical psychologist working in Lahore to tell us about these three therapies. Hence in this video you will listen from her as well. But let me first revise something that is related and that you have already studied in your class. But it will help you to understand whatever she will talk about later on. Okay, what we know about cognition. The words you are seeing here on the slide, now almost at the end of the course, you are quite well versed about these words in connection with cognition and cognitive psychology. Well, how do you perceive and how can something affect our perception? How our thoughts process and how we memorize and how we recall anything? How do we feel and how do we judge and what we judge actually? And how do we evaluate something? Uh, how do we learn and how do we understand? How do we acquire knowledge? And how do we create and understand language? And the most important, how do we think? So we have gone through almost all of these questions during the course, and but with reference to this particular lecture, I will just devise something about rational and irrational thoughts that will help you later on. Okay, we know that we may have rational and irrational thoughts. We may have logical or illogical thoughts. But that is what we are created. This is how we are created. We are human beings and we are created in that way. And that is how our brain works. The way we have irrational and rational thoughts, we can also interpret same way. We may have rational interpretation of our irrational thoughts, and we have irrational interpretation of our rational thoughts whatsoever, and vice versa, we may have rational interpretation of our rational thoughts as well. So we think and we also try to interpret it, but sometimes we ended up in irrational interpretation as well. This is all about the complexity of our thought system. In one of the class, I discussed a little bit about magical thinking, and we talk about the law of similarity and law of contact, and how does it work. It is especially meaningful, the situation nowadays we are having. Well, the irrational thought that can reduce anxiety when we experience some unexplained threat. But the same way, the irrational thoughts can increase our anxiety, such as in OCD, we may have increased anxiety due to irrational thoughts. Um, well, let us think about something. For example, I must be loved by everyone whom I meet. How does it sound? Do you think it is a rational thought, very logical, or this is irrational thought? Okay, I hope you can recall the discussion we had about this in our class. Let's move on. If A loves B, it is not necessary and possible that B should also love A. There could be so many reasons for this statement. There might be difference of the perceptions, there might be the difference of the priorities, there might be the bad experience in the past that is driving us to dislike something, and there may be many more reasons. Well, now, should we think that we must be loved by everyone we meet? Even though the person disliking us may have irrational thoughts, such as prejudices, presumptions, but even then, We cannot think like this, that we should be loved by everyone whom we meet. Okay, similarly, I am a complete failure and I am the best and I must succeed. These thoughts also does not link yourself with with the rational thinking or the logical thinking. Now, let's see something. Here you will see uh, how you see our own experience that can make us think rationally or irrationally. For example, in this picture, you are seeing a script. You made soup for your child. Soup was bad, and you thought it is awful. Then you thought, if you cannot even make soup, what type of a cook you are? A terrible cook. And then if you cannot even make soup for your child, your own child, what kind of a mother you are? A bad mother. And then you feel you are a complete failure. And here your thinking is also affecting your emotions, your mood in a negative way. Now, the therapist will look into how you reach this core belief. And then once the therapist is able to read the script, therapist can help you to think rationally and positively, and that will definitely affect your behavior and your emotions. Okay, now I will stop here, and Miss Aisha Shahid Sheikh, a clinical psychologist working in Lahore, will tell you more about it. And thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Aisha Shahid Sheikh, and I am a clinical psychologist by profession. Today, we are going to talk about different kind of cognitive therapies that actually came into being and how they promoted and helped in developing the new therapies that we are all practicing these days as clinical psychologists. So, I'm going to talk about three major therapies, which include cognitive behavior therapy by Donald Mishenbaum, REBT, Rational Motive Behavior Therapy by Albert Ellis, and Cognitive Therapy by Aaron T. So, when we talk about the cognitive aspect of therapy, in the early 1950s, scientists, psychiatrists, and psychologists all started working on the fact that how our thoughts are processed and how we process different kind of information and emotions so that we're able to behave in a certain way. So what happened was that Donald Mishenman proposed a theory of cognitive behavioral modification, in which he actually followed a process through which he wanted to have the process of behavioral modification done of his clients by working on the thought process. Now, the important thing that you need to understand here is that his therapy or his behavioral modification technique helped in development of the latest cognitive behavior therapy that we're using up till now. And if we talk about Donald Mishenman, his contribution in the treatment of post-traumatic stress at that time in the early 1950s was very significant. So the CBM, the cognitive behavioral modification therapy, it significantly contributed in the development of CBT, and it focuses on the negative self-talk and focuses on producing a life narrative, which can entail positive self-talk as well. So, if we talk about this therapy or cognitive behavior modification, it majorly follows three main steps in which one has to look forward or look into the thought process that they're having. They need to illustrate if they're having negative self-talk or positive self-talk, and if they're having negative self-talk, then they'll have to process the negative self-talk and work on it. Um, if we talk about cognitive behavior modification, it is also called that it is kind of instructional therapy. What does that mean? It means that the client has to do the major work. The therapist would be there to only guide them to a certain level and not beyond that. and the client has to focus on the cognitive errors. And what the major chunk over here is that the client has to work on their own, and the therapist does not have a lot of say in how the therapy is going to go in what direction, or at what pace the client should proceed with this kind of therapy. Yeah, so this is Donald Meschenbaum's CBT. The major thing and major important thing here is that it actually promoted uh, in the development of cognitive behavior therapy, which is the one of the latest and most common used therapy all over the world. And this was its foundation. All right, let's move on to REBT, which is rational emotive behavior therapy. Rational emotive behavior therapy was introduced in around 1955, again in 1950s. 1950s and 1960s was one of the times. These two decades were very famous for the development of cognitive therapies. So, REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, was introduced by Albert Ellis, and it gained a lot of popularity at that time because it hailed from a philosophical concept, and it focused a lot on the change produced with therapy and on the benefit of the client that a therapist is going to work with. So it is one of the major popular therapies of that time in the era of 60s and 70s. And again, CBT is an offshoot of REBT as well. So when Albert started working in this module, he started by naming it as rational therapy, or RT, where he worked on the rational thought process and irrational thought process. Then he found that along with the illogical or logical or rational irrational thoughts, there are a number of emotions that a person is facing as well. So he added an E in the RT, so it became rational emotive therapy, RET. Later on, when he started working on it, he also noticed that people are supposed to behave in a certain way when they're facing some kind of certain emotion, and when they're kind of having a certain kind of thought pattern. So again, then he finally added a B in this acronym as well. So it became REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, and this is how we know about it till now. It has a Socratic style of therapy, which means that the therapist would be involved in the therapy. The therapist would lead the client to a certain place, and they would guide them to proceed to a certain level. So this is its manifestation. Another thing that is very important is that it has a major focus on philosophical aspect. So there's a lot of philosophy in REBT. The person has to see a number of philosophies. They have to go through a number of philosophical concepts while working with the thought process. So it's kind of relatable to many people as well. And in the 60s, 70s, when philosophy was very much in fashion, people were able to relate to it on a deeper level. So again, this is why it became so popular. Another important thing is that it highlights secondary disturbance. For example, if there is, if we are talking about Donald's cognitive behavioral modification, it talks about the major chunk or major error that one person will be seeing. But in RABT, we talk about the secondary disturbances that one might be having, and it highlights it, which means that the person would be able to get rid of the major chunk of the problem that they're currently facing, but they'd be able to tackle the secondary issues that would be going along with the major issue as well. So this is how Albert Ellis moved on. There are a number of techniques that are used in this process. Some of them include disputing, referenting, pros and cons, benefit analysis, charting, diary making. These are a few techniques but disputing, refronting, these are the most commonly used techniques. We also use modeling in REBT. So every client has their own problem, and the therapy techniques are used according to the severity and symptoms as well. So that was about REBT. Now I'm going to move forward towards cognitive therapy. So I think most of you would have heard about CBT, a cognitive behavior therapy, but before a B was inserted in CBT, it was only cognitive therapy, and it was proposed by Aaron T. Beck, Dr. Beck, who is very famous. Uh, um, and cognitive therapy actually expanded into CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and which is actually one of the most famous techniques all over the world, which is used by most psychological issues all over the world as well. So cognitive therapy, CT, is based on cognitive model, which states that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of a person are all interconnected. And what happened in CT was that Beck divided the beliefs of a person or beliefs of mind on three levels. Number one is automatic thought, number two is intermediate belief, and number three is core belief or basic belief. Automatic thought is any thought that comes into your mind. Intermediate belief is a belief that would cater another happening or another thought process or any other behavior. And then comes core belief or basic belief, a belief system that would have triggered all the automatic thoughts and intermediate beliefs. So if somebody has a problematic core belief, their automatic thoughts would be problematic, and their intermediate belief would be affected by it as well. So one needs to work on all these notions while working through CT or CBT. Alright, then if somebody has problematic core beliefs, what is being done is that the therapist helps them in the restructuring of the cognitive belief system. So it is called cognitive restructuring, and it involves 4 steps. Number one is identification of problematic cognitions or problematic thoughts, which are called automatic thoughts. Mostly automatic thoughts are dysfunctional or negative in nature. They would be illogical in nature, and a person would be seeing themselves or their world in a negative way. Their belief system about the world and their own self might be distorted in this condition as well. So, which means that if somebody has a problematic automatic thought, their perception towards the world would be affected, and they might not be able to help others in the full way. Okay, then comes identification of the cognitive distortions. If there is an automatic thought, then we'll have to see what kind of cognitive distortion one person is having, because CT introduces 6 types of cognitive distortion or cognitive errors, which can help in creating automatic thought process. So we identify those cognitive distortions, and then what we do is, the next step is that we rationally dispute the automatic thoughts with the Socratic method. Now most of you might be thinking that it is quite same and like that of REBT, but the problem here is that because these are all interlinked, and most of these people, the 3 people we have talked about, they actually worked with each other in one way or other, so their therapies are very much similar as well. But the major thing is that every therapy has a major chunk which actually differentiates it from the other therapy as well. So like the way behavioral modification by Donald, it focuses on behavioral modification and thought errors only, the negative self-talk. In REBT, it focuses on the philosophical event and philosophical aspect and disputing of the thoughts. And CT, in Beck's cognitive therapy, we work on automatic thoughts and cognitive errors, and we actively work through them. So the fourth step here is that what we do is that we attribute the negative thought error with the automatic thought, and then we provide it with a rational response. So our automatic thought or thought error is weakened, and when it is weakened, it does not affect our emotions and our mood in a way that it was doing it earlier on. So all these three therapies are being used somewhat in the original form up till now, but most of them have developed in a certain way as well. If we talk about Donald Mission-Bunn's behavioral modification, cognitive behavioral modification, it is not that much widely practiced, but it is practiced by some people who are more focused on treating post-traumatic stress disorder or any other trauma that people would have gone through. And then comes rational motivated therapy. REBT is actually used in its original form. And then we have CT. CT has now developed into CBT, and we have a number of pointers that we work on while using CBT as well. So here it was a summary of the major and the former cognitive therapies that were being introduced in the late 1950s and 60s, and then they were being practiced all over the world, and now they have developed into a secondary or third wave of therapeutic analysis or therapeutic processes. That's all. Thank you very much.